Joining us now on the show, Emily Law, is it Lawler?
Yep.
Lawler. Lawler. She's a lead reporter over at the statewide team for MLive, but you're also a baker. How
I
do
do.
those two come together?
I do a lot. And, when you're reporting on politics every day, it's nice to come home and have something baking to do, I guess.
Well, before we get to your baking side gig, because I can't even seem to cut and slice the cookies from, the grocery store without burning them. But before we get to that side, let's jump into the politics here in the state of Michigan, because there's so much going on right now. Uh, let's start with the governor. There's already kind of rumors and talk out there about her reelection. Do you think she's going to run for reelection? Because I really thought she had her sights on higher positions, probably within the Biden cabinet.
Yeah, well, I do think that she's poising to run for reelection. Two big pieces of news out of the governor's office in the last week. One was her State of the State address. So she really put this emphasis on sort of a return to bipartisanship, especially after some of the vitriol that we saw during the 2020 election, the presidential election, which she was obviously helping Joe Biden. She was one of his national campaign co-chairs. But yeah, so she sort of tried to strike that tone again. And it sounded, frankly, a lot more like 2018 campaign trail Gretchen Whitmer, where she wasn't necessarily, it wasn't hitting back against Trump, which she spent a lot of the last year and a half doing. It was more, how do we move forward for Michigan? And I want to work with Republicans to do that, was sort of the crux of the message there. And then the second piece of information that I would take a hard look at is that her campaign finance reports from her campaign came in this week, and she has raised just a war chest, so much money. To put it in perspective, she raised $5.5 million so far this cycle, and we are 2 years out or a year and a half out from this election. So at that time period, at the comparable time in 2012, which is, halfway through Snyder's first term, he had raised under $1 million. So, 5 times that is what she has going toward this cause right now. So I think it is a pretty strong indicator that she's looking to run again for governor in 2022. And I think it would be hard to, sort of pull her away from Michigan. She's always said that, Michigan's her top priority and her favorite place to be. So those cabinet positions you mentioned haven't really seemed to include Whitmer too much in the speculation.
Well, of course she says that, but we all know that had she been pegged as the vice president nominee, she would have said, bye, Michigan. She would not turn down that opportunity, but she just didn't have the experience, I think, that they were looking for at the time. And then, yes, she is a female, but she is not a minority female, which the Biden ticket, I think, was really looking into as well. Why do you think she's been able to raise so much money?
I think part of it is her growing national profile. We have a governor who is on CNN and MSNBC all the time. There was a period of time this spring where I felt like anytime you click the remote, you're going to run into either Governor Whitmer or maybe Attorney General Dana Nessel or Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. Of course, I think that Donald Trump tweeting about all of them all the time just drew more national attention into our state. So I think that big national profile has probably helped her raise money not only from in Michigan, but from outside Michigan, which is something that I'm still crunching the numbers on over the next couple of days here.
Yeah, Emily, we want to say thank you for taking time to be with us. But one show the governor has not done, from my understanding, is our show. We're too small for her, per se. But I wouldn't be as easy as some of our mainstream media people have been on her as well. So with that, though, I have to say I'm really fascinated by what's happening behind the scenes in the Democratic Party, because you have Mike Duggan in the city of Detroit, but you also have Mark Hackl, the Macomb County executive. And Mark Hackl has not been a big supporter of some of Gretchen Whitmer's decision-making during this pandemic. What also makes you think, is he going to run against her? But they're within the same party.
Yeah, so the latest I have on that from Mark Hackl is outdated, but I was on Off the Record with him, I think over the summer, and we asked him about that, and he didn't have any plans to run at that time.
They always say that.
Myself, I'm not sure if it was the summer or the fall, but in any case, it might be worth checking in with him again. I think that Mark Hackl, frankly, would be an attractive candidate not only to Democrats but to Republicans. He's sort of on that moderate edge. He has been probably the most vocal Democrat who's opposed some of Governor Whitmer's orders coming out and sort of done a lot to draw attention to what he sees as contradictions in them and sort of the unpredictable nature that some of them have had, not just, in the most recent shutdown, but over the last almost year at this point.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to go through her campaign finance reports, just so people know, like, I'm a geek. And so some nights when I can't sleep, that's what I do is I go through their campaign finance reports, because you want to look at who's donating and then you track them to the businesses. But also I like to see how much they're spending and where they're spending it, who their donors are, and this, that, and the other. And I will say, if people were paying closer attention to Eric Smith, which I was hitting myself in the head over this one, it was so obvious that there was something going on with him and the business person. I forget the guy's name, but he hasn't officially been charged in the investigation with Eric Smith, who of course was the Macomb County prosecutor, who just entered a plea of guilty as well. So these campaign finance reports are open to the public, but they are very telling as well if you take the time to look through them. But knowing that too, what do you think is going to be her slogan going forward? Because of course we know it was fix the roads. Now it's like, let's fix the road ahead, because things are changing with the pandemic. And she doesn't have Trump right now to kind of point the finger to, because at some point in time, she has to recognize Trump gave her a bigger platform than she would have had he not been pointing the finger at her all these months.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that over the last year, we sort of saw her run, trying to think of how to phrase this. Her guiding principle in the campaign was, I'll take your cue, fix the roads. But yeah, it did sort of morph into Trump isn't doing enough to stop COVID, right? I mean, she was one of the first people who took that platform nationally. She was a sort of a trendsetter. She was one of the first people to speak out against his sort of lack of a plan, to ask for more federal guidance. Obviously, now she's in a position where she wants to promote that she's partnering with the Biden administration. So it's a different feel for her, certainly. And as far as fix the roads ahead, I think that she was her catchphrase she unveiled during the State of the State. But I mean, it's going to be hard to live up to, frankly. She has this $3.5 billion plan for state roads, but frankly, the roads that people are the most upset about and the potholes that you're the most frustrated about probably aren't state roads. They're probably roads under your local authority, and those just haven't gotten any more funding. So she did indicate during the State of the State that she would be willing to do a plan that's previously been proposed that would let locals use gas and registration taxes and fees to raise some of their own revenue. So that could be one avenue, but that is not fixing the roads, right? I think that there's sort of that depends on local ability to raise those taxes and fees, and it would depend on whether locals in every area of the state wanted to do it. So there won't be a sort of a smooth road, if you will, to a re-election campaign necessarily, and she's gonna I think need to explain that to voters when the re-election campaign starts in earnest.
So Emily, I will say, when I say roads, because I was brought up that that's a bad word. Like, you're not allowed to say it. And the fact that she says it in a campaign, I'm like, are you still allowed to say that? She must be allowed to say it, right? You're using it in headlines and this, that, and the other. But it's still like, I hear my parents, that's a naughty word, so I'm like, I can't say it.
I don't mind it. I'm not gonna lie, there are worse words that happen in my house.
Right, like the B word. I remember the first time I heard Oprah use it on her show, and it was during the daytime. I'm like, I don't think that's allowable, but they're using it. I don't know.
Well, I would never want to offend anyone. So.
But with that too, though, because I think the politics really are fascinating in the state of Michigan and what goes on behind the scenes. That's really the deal making um, with our politicians. And now we're seeing this huge, it's nothing new about the Republicans and the Democrats, but typically behind the scenes, they'll kind of come together on some of these issues. But Shirky seems to be like, no, we're not playing games. We're not ready to play nice in the sandbox with the Democrats and Governor Whitmer. Can they come together?
Yeah, I think that's the question. Governor Whitmer has gone about, I think, as far as she can go in terms of controlling this pandemic through first her executive orders, and then when the underpinnings of those were struck down by the courts, her MDHHS director, she just appointed a new MDHHS director. But, even that could be thrown into limbo. Republicans are threatening to sort of withhold appointment approval through their advise and consent process. So she's kind of hitting this wall, I think. And then some of the things she's looking at now are economic recovery from COVID that necessarily depends on the legislature to appropriate some of those dollars. So even the dollars that the federal government is saying, like, hey, Michigan, here's money that you can use to help recover from COVID. She has ideas, she has programs she'd like to put them into, but the legislature holds the purse strings and really has a lot of say over that. And they've already sort of set themselves up to use that as a bargaining chip, if you will, and not just make that an easy okay on that money. So I think that really is the question, especially after her State of the State address, where she, like I said, returned to this really bipartisan, let's work together message. It takes two to make that happen. So if the Republicans don't decide that they'd also like to go in that vein, it could really complicate things for her and could complicate Michigan's economic recovery.
I think the next 6 months are really going to be interesting here in the state of Michigan. And just like what you were saying, it's about the money because businesses are still struggling. You have students that are not playing high school sports. That whole campaign and that lawsuit, I think it is going to be interesting to see how that plays out during this whole entire fiasco. But on top of that too, we have the Snyder administration, Dana Nessel, what's going on in Flint and that investigation, because I think there are a lot of legal loopholes in that one that we're going to see play out. But on top of this, it's the economic recovery, which really needs to be front and center, I think, for the governor going forward. She needs to be able to turn Michigan's economy around, because when you have people going to Michigan, Indiana, and other states nearby just to be able to go out to a restaurant or to play hockey or to do some of these other things, that I think is going to impact her reelection as well.
It's hard to say because we are so far out. 15 things could change between now and then. So, yeah. It's been interesting to watch sort of the flashpoints in this debate evolve. I remember in the spring, there was, of course, like Operation Haircut, I think, was the barbers protesting on the Capitol lawn. And then, of course, we sort of morphed into, the hullabaloo over the on again, off again nature of fall sports. Gym owners were a flashpoint. Restaurants were a flashpoint when they were one of the only industries that was still closed. And then, we've landed on high school winter sports as the next sort of flashpoint in this debate. So, it's a tug and pull, right? So I talked to a health expert in Kent County and was kind of poking around on what we learned from fall sports and how that informs what's happening with winter sports. And, the counterpoint to let them play is that I talked to a health expert who said that they have the data and the contact tracing to show that, some participation in fall sports kept kids out of the classroom. So, you're kind of deciding on all these public health measures, you're prioritizing. And, the governor at this point is prioritizing getting kids in seats in classrooms over winter sports. Although there's this rumbling that things might change. But, it's hard to picture in 2022, by the time she's up for re-election, it's hard to picture us still having these types of restrictions, or really any restrictions, right? Like these have been pretty targeted to slow or stop the spread of COVID. We have this vaccine coming online. And it's hard for me to know really at this point how relevant that will be in the minds of voters by the time we get to the election.
Let's hope that it's behind us by that time. But with that, are you getting any inside knowledge or scoops from some of your sources about Gordon stepping down?
I wish that I were. So we have a lot of feelers out. I know that we're not the only news organization that's poking around on this in Lansing right now, but we are poking around on it. I've asked the governor about it in a one-on-one, I think last week. And, I'm paraphrasing, but what she essentially told me was, there's nothing more to the story here, which made me even more curious because I'm a reporter. So when you tell me there's nothing to the story, I tend to think there's more to the story. Sorry, just my cynical.
Right. And it starts with, oh, did you fire him or did he resign? Did he get a severance package? If so, what is said a severance package? It's like at the end of the day, it's our tax dollars and our knowledge. And you want to say and sit up there and talk about transparency? Well, be transparent. If you fired the guy, simply say, hey, I fired the guy. Why? Well, he was a lawyer. We probably shouldn't have had him in that position to begin with, but I did it as a favor, through the DNC and the Obama administration. Like, just be honest. He was a lawyer. He wasn't a health guy. It's like, but if he's being paid, then we should know that. Or did he just quit that day? Did he resign or did he fire? It's a yes/no question.
I haven't really heard actually some of the speculation that you just raised, but I think we'll get the financial details. I mean, that's all available through the Freedom of Information Act. Everyone I think is actively seeking that at this point. I think that what's kind of up in the air is whether we'll get the backstory. I think what made me suspicious initially was, first of all, that he announced it on his Twitter, was where the news broke. That's not typical. Whitmer's office is pretty good at controlling a message. And then secondly, that the press release came out and basically barely mentioned him. So he got like one sentence at the end. And of course, the whole press release was about the new director she appointed. So, I think that there's certainly there's got to be a reason that the reshuffling happened. And I think everyone's trying to get to the bottom of that right now. But I'm not sure that it's connected to a broader anything broader than what's the dynamics within the department and the governor's office.
Yeah, but what you said there was interesting. Her office is pretty good about controlling the message. We've seen that play out here in the city of Detroit with Mayor Duggan as well. But that's a conversation for a different day, just another minute or so with you here. Before we let you go, tell us about your cookie business.
Yeah, like I say, some people come home and have a glass of wine at night. I come home and bake a batch of cookies. So I have had, just this little business where I come home and to cool off and release some of that creative energy, spend time in my kitchen, which is a very safe place to be alone during a pandemic. And it's been really nice to be a part of people's celebrations. It's easy to forget in a year like the year we've had that there are still babies being born and people having birthdays and people having milestone celebrations and weddings even. And just to be like a tiny part of all those things has given me a much brighter outlook in a pandemic year that I might have had otherwise.
You're listening to 89.3 WBLD Orchard Lake, 88.1 WBFH Bloomfield Hills. And Emily, I think you're selling yourself short because you've actually been able to not just bake cookies, because usually what I would do is always give my sources cookies, but what they didn't know is I was buying them from Kroger and putting them in these cute packages because I can't bake. Like I tried to bake some for our firefighters and our police officers recently, and they were just the cut and slice ones, and I overbaked them. So you're selling yourself short because you're not only going home and baking cookies, but you turned it into a business.
Well, give me a call out next time. I'd love to help those police and firefighter cookies.
So, but is it enough to actually run a business, or is this one of those things where it's kind of a hobby and a small business too?
Yeah, so the state of Michigan cottage food law, this, I know it's a weird that I have an overlap between like a policy background or a policy covering background anyway, and cookies. But yeah, the cottage food law actually caps your income from cottage food businesses like my cookie business at $25,000. So it's more of a, I would say, a hobby level thing, but you know, at least it pays for itself. You would be astounded at the amount of equipment that I either have bought or would like to buy to make the most gorgeous cookies.
Well, it's great. Where can they see some of your cookies though? Because these aren't just regular cookies. These are like fabulous cookies.
Yeah, I try to get really creative with the design. So I'm on Twitter at Cookie Press, on Instagram at Cookie Press, and if you search the Facebook for the Cookie Press Lansing, I'll pop right up. And yeah, I'd love to see some of you on there. And I try to share some kind of funny stuff too. So occasionally you'll get like voting reminders with my cookies or fun holiday stuff. So yeah, give me a follow. I'd love it.
We'll definitely follow you. I did see someone on Facebook posted that they got cookies of Bernie Sanders, but also it was like his head, but then the other cookie was his mittens. I was like, I have to have some of those.
Oh man. Well, I haven't done that design yet, but it sounds fun.
You have to do it, especially if you're a political reporter, right?
True.
Well, Emily, it's been great talking to you. We always appreciate your knowledge and your insight. So thank you for being with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.